What are we reacting to?
We're reacting to this video call. Yes, anyways, I'm not gonna like this video. We don't know why exactly, but we'll find out.
Look at this chart. It compares military budgets of countries, but it's a bit different because it doesn't compare one country's military spending to another, but instead compares the US's military spending with the cumulative total of the 9 other countries' military spending, who are all on the top 10 list of biggest spenders. The reason? Well, the United States spent over $800 billion
billions and billions and billions and billions
on its military in 2021,
Oh,
thus
wow.
outspending
$800 billion.
South Korea,
Shit, that's a lot of
Japan,
money,
Saudi
man.
Arabia, Germany, France, Russia, the UK, India, and
shit.
China combined. So there is frankly no worthwhile comparison to be made here. Yet still, after fighting wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and after a trade war with China, as well as unfriendly relations with Iran and North Korea, the US has its fair share of enemies who undoubtedly want to hurt them in one way, shape, or form. So, hypothetically speaking, despite such a well-equipped military, could an enemy ever successfully invade the US or make devastating damages to the nation in some way? Well, as it turns out, this question was a bit harder to answer than I initially planned, because the military is only one of the reasons why the US is so unconquerable. You see, the US is in an incredible position, geographically, and its secret weapon might therefore be its location. All you have to do is look at this map to understand why. For over 150 years, America's territory has stretched all the way across the continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. These huge coasts separate the US from any potential enemy, so
They're protected from both sides, huh?
Yeah, from both sides.
They got the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And no enemy territory near. They got both allies, got Mexico and they got Canada on top.
I have many friends, many friends.
They're in a good strategic position, man.
It's not gonna be easy.
even in wartime, the American mainland is very well protected. Take World War II for example, when America fought in both Europe and Asia at the same time. Barely any attacks happened on US soil during the entire war. That meant American factories could keep making planes and weapons without interruptions, unlike the constantly bombed Soviet
They
and
can make
British factories.
all these-
On top of that,
The factories without, having any issues. Man, they're really in a good position actually.
Yeah, I think the defense is not gonna be an easy thing to actually break into.
Defense Production Act allowed the president to allocate materials and facilities for national defense, direct companies to prioritize government orders, and offer loans to companies to make this happen fast. In 2020, this law was used to increase the production of ventilators and medical grade masks. So clearly, it's a very useful law to have in the toolbox, since the US still has a domestic industrial base with major shipyards, aviation, and automotive factories. A wartime scenario could easily involve switching
that's
to
a
wartime
lot,
production,
man,
so
damn.
this
It
makes
is a lot.
sense.
Oh,
Not to
man.
mention the existing
It's
military
insane.
industry, which is already making tanks, planes, weapons, and warships for the US military. Factories on US soil are a huge advantage, because the US military can protect its supply chain simply by defending its own territory. Very little has to come from
Yeah.
outside compared to its enemies, who would need to constantly run supplies across an entire ocean. I mean, just look at the size of the Atlantic Ocean and the even bigger Pacific. To get
From Atlantic, nobody's gonna come there, man, and the Pacific. Even if they try to come in,
It's a long
the
way.
satellite, the long way, and the satellites could track them down.
Yeah.
I think the only way would be if they have a nuclear submarine or something like that. Couple of
Who-
nuclear submarine,
who's
they could
created
get into the territory and then hit the main areas like New York, California, Washington, or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that could work.
I mean, like the Chinese, they have good submarines. I heard that the Russians too have some deep submarines. Imagine if they could attach a nuclear arsenal there.
Yeah.
That
that
could
would
make
be-
a big hit.
Yeah, that would be crazy.
Yeah. Unless you turn the allies against the US, then there's a slight opportunity.
You mean like taking Mexico? to
Yeah, or
US
Mexico or changing the opinion of Canada and then they win in. But then again, still US is in a
Yeah.
good position. They got Alaska too, Russia made the mistake of selling Alaska.
Yeah.
an idea of just how long enemy supply chains would have to be. Not to mention the fact that with today's satellites, it would be trivially easy to spot an invasion coming from thousands of miles away and take out enemy shipments before they ever reached the US coast. Supply lines are critical in
That's a
any
lot,
war,
man.
and the US military
Sheesh.
is well known for its excellent logistics capabilities. They have the added advantage of the 45,000-mile highway system, which was
Wow.
designed with troop movements in mind. On top of that, the US has 140,000 miles of freight railway infrastructure. Now sure,
They've got a good
this can be
infrastructure.
a double-edged sword, as enemies could use this infrastructure to penetrate into America's heartland. And infrastructure could definitely be a weak point, if
They
not
could
totally
sabotage it.
guarded.
I mean, they could
A
take
good
over it
example of
and
this
then...
would be this pipeline that runs over 5,500 miles from Texas to New Jersey and carries nearly 45% of the East Coast's fuel supply. In May 2021, a cyber attack shut down the pipeline for 5 days, and this isn't a fluke either. China and Russia both support cybercrime groups that regularly attack government agencies and companies. The former head lawyer for the NSA, Stuart Baker, told the Washington Post, quote, "We're fighting the cyber equivalent of a land war in Asia every day. But America's infrastructure is more than just highways and internet cables. Back in the day, another kind of highway already connected the Midwest from north to south, the Mississippi River, and the connected Missouri River is the 4th longest river system in the world."
Wow.
So yeah, this river has always been
They are
crucial
blessed,
to
man.
connecting the economies of major cities like New Orleans, Minneapolis, and St. Louis. Today, the river is still used to ship goods across America. So during an invasion, the Mississippi could likely help move troops and weapons too. What's impressive about the US's geography is how challenging it makes the US to conquer, and that might have to do with the diversity of terrains like deserts, swamps, and mountains. The Appalachian Mountains in the east and the Rocky Mountains in the west serve as major barriers
They
to
got
inland invasion,
natural
and the Great
barriers,
Lakes in
man.
the northeast form yet another barrier. The result is that the flatter areas along the southern border seem like the best entry point. But the US compensates for these weaknesses with huge numbers of troops stationed in California and Texas. The coasts aren't any easier to invade with hundreds of thousands of troops stationed in military bases. Not to mention the fact that the US has peaceful relations with its neighbors to the north and south, which both have smaller populations and militaries if any turmoil was to unfold. To the east and west, the US has no neighbors as previously discussed, a fact which has led America to focus on other things instead of imminent invasions. On top of that, the NATO treaty requires European and Canadian allies to come to America's defense if it's ever attacked. Oh yeah, and in addition to its current military personnel, the US still
So they got like, first starts with the ocean, then they got a good infrastructure, they got the natural barriers, the mountain and the lakes.
They got the allies.
They got the allies from NATO, man.
So yeah, it's gonna be really challenging.
Impossible.
Actually.
Not challenging. I don't think it's even challenging. It's impossible.
Impossible.
maintains the selective service system. See, all males from 18 to 25 have to sign up for a lottery to be drafted in the case of a national emergency. During the height of World War II, the US drafted over 3 million men per year, so this system could potentially expand the US's military personnel by several million.
They got the US military also. They could recruit many people.
We had our beautiful Marine standing there. Bing, 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 bing.
Like even if somebody was going to invade the United States, it's going to be hard because even the people are more patriotic, you know.
Yeah,
They have more weapons than the military, I think.
Yeah, true.
So they probably take the first course of action.
I guess every house has like a gun, you know. Insane.
And we're not even done yet, because besides all this, an invasion is still very unlikely for another reason: the Pentagon's unrivaled resources. As I mentioned in the beginning, the US's defense budget is unrivaled. The US spent almost 3 times as much as China in 2021 and 10 times more than Russia. The result is that no country has enough ships or planes to get past the US forces. According to one military expert, quote, "The amphibious assault capability of the combined militaries of the world are simply too insignificant to get a beachhead on a coast." And then we of course have the civilians, who have even more guns than the military. So maybe
I was
armed
saying, that's what I was
citizens
saying.
could also join the fight against invaders. I mean, it's a possibility. But anyway, Urban warfare presents
Yeah,
more
Russia's gonna just
challenges than
defend
fighting in open
usually.
combat and often gives an advantage to
really
the country
counterattack.
defending its
Yes.
own territory. We only have to look at Russia's failed invasion of Kiev for proof of this factor. While urban areas make up a small amount of US territory, any invader would have to take control of cities to conquer the country, since 82% of the population lives in these cities. Another advantage of armies defending their own country from invasion is the will to fight. According to the RAND Corporation, a think tank closely tied to the Pentagon, will to fight means the disposition and decision to fight, to keep fighting, and to win. The report highlights the times will to fight was emphasized in US military doctrine, demonstrating just how vital it is to military victories. You can clearly see how that influenced the outcome of World War II and the Vietnam War. When a country is invaded, like Vietnam was, it's natural that the invaded country is more motivated to defend its land. I think it's safe to assume the same would apply during an invasion of the US. But let's shift gears for a bit.
US is very patriotic, man. Like it's impossible to attack also, so they all will come together. Obviously, they're going to defend their motherland anyhow. The only enemy is in the US is the people within. Unless they go too woke and shit, then that's it.
Yeah, it's the only people that can destroy.
Yeah. So if it goes way too woke, they themselves will destroy themselves within. So
And discuss one enormous US advantage I haven't mentioned, which is self-reliance for its food, energy, and weapons needs. Take these green areas for example. This land is mostly used for agriculture since only
Wow,
2% of America's land is in
that's
urban
big, man.
areas.
Agriculture.
This low-lying land is a major reason why the US is nearly self-sufficient in agriculture and even exports food to many countries around the
Cover
world.
everything.
It also explains why America now actually has the most arable land in the world. That's right, the US has more arable land than India and China. What's more surprising is that India is only a third the size of the US, and China is slightly smaller but can only sustain large populations near its east coast. The crazy thing is that both of those countries have over 1.3 billion people, or about 1 billion more than the US population. And since the US is only projected to grow by another 100 million people over the next century, the US likely has enough resources to support a billion plus population, but they don't need to. As for energy, the US also has impressive amounts of petroleum and gas, especially in parts of Texas. It has around 44 billion barrels of proved crude oil reserves and almost 500 trillion cubic feet of natural gas.
500 trillion.
They've got everything, man. These guys.
Trillion.
Yeah, there's so much, man.
Damn.
Oil, they've got gas.
I never thought I would.
defense.
Oh, trillion, man. They got 44 billions of proved crude oil reserves, and they got 500 trillion cubic feet of natural gas reserves. On top of that, they got they're self-sufficient in
Agriculture.
agriculture, and damn,
Reserves.
they're blessed,
In
man.
fact, when you include biofuels, the US could be considered the largest oil producer in the world. It seems like even the bad parts of US geography have a major silver lining. The Appalachian Mountains on the east coast that I mentioned earlier aren't suited for farming, but they do have huge coal deposits that have been exploited for decades. And surprisingly, at least to me,
They got coal as
America
well.
has the world's largest coal reserves, and loads of other natural resources from energy to metals. But to share a bit of a weakness of the US, it turns out it doesn't have every metal it needs to defend itself. You see, this shiny looking rock is a mineral called antimony, and is critical for making bullets and other weapons, and even night vision goggles. While antimony played an important role in World War II ammunition production, the last mine
Antimony,
in the US
First time I heard
closed
it.
in 1997. The US is therefore reliant on China and Russia, its two biggest military rivals, for supply of this critical mineral. So the US does have weaknesses, but who could actually have the military might and, most importantly, motivation to try and invade the US? Well, the latest US defense strategy names the People's Republic of China as the US's most consequential strategic competitor, and notes that Russia poses a acute threat.
Is China a threat and Russia a threat? I don't think so, man. I think US is too OP already. Overpowered already, man.
Yeah, they've got.
I mean,
entire NATO,
because
yeah.
because the US, right? They got their allies, right? They
Yeah.
got NATO. NATO covering out Russia, and then they got the allies like Japan, South Korea, and Philippines covering China. And they got the Australia too involved in it, Australia and New Zealand too. So I mean, like US is in a position where they are the only superpower, man, in the whole world. Russia can, but like in the game of Ukraine, you saw that Russia was struggling.
Still struggling, but yeah, I mean, Ukraine
And
was just
Ukraine is not a joke army either. They are one of, I think, the sixth some best army. But I understand why you said Russia is still a threat, because I mean they almost depleted the entire Europe stock, man. Every country was like they were sending their tanks in. They were like out of tanks and sending more tanks in, out of tanks.
to support Ukraine.
Yeah, to support Ukraine. Russia is tough.
Mm.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still difficult to fight US.
Yeah, but Russia, it's lost, right? The USSR is no more, so
Mm.
it's just a pipe dream.
Beyond these two big threats, it also mentions North Korea and Iran. But let's focus on China for a bit. It's true that China is slowly building up its military capabilities, but it isn't even ready to launch an invasion on the island of Taiwan, let alone the west coast of the United States. I don't think I even need to mention how the loss of its largest trading partner would devastate the Chinese economy. Still, there's some reason for concern. If China disabled American satellites, it could debilitate the US military's ability to monitor troop movements in real time. If you're thinking this sounds like science fiction though, you'd be wrong, because in 2007, China successfully destroyed one of its own satellites with a ballistic missile. Floating 850 kilometers above the Earth, the destroyed satellite is at a similar altitude to US intelligence satellites, so China could theoretically destroy them too. In terms of Russia, well, they have now performed a similar test, which endangered the crew of the ISS. Taking out satellites is a bit extreme though, because it causes hazardous space debris that would affect all current and future satellites. That includes Russia's and China's satellites. But Russia and China are already interfering with US satellites on a daily basis. They're just using lasers and jammers instead of trying to shoot them down. What's even scarier though is China's recent investments in AI and quantum computing, which could change the future of warfare. I mean, imagine how hard it would be for the Pentagon to strategize against an enemy using an AI supercomputer to calculate decisions in milliseconds. But if we look at Russia again for a second, their military
But I think that with the computers and AI, I think US is already making the move, right? They block the chips from China, manufacturing the chips from China,
Yeah.
or even sending chips to China. I can't remember what it was about. So they already made the move. So I don't think China can progress that way unless. But I heard that China has all the minerals from different countries that is needed to build chips and all that stuff. I'm not sure what it was. So China does not even have the upper hand there.
Mm.
So US is going to start building, I think, plants in their own country and in Japan.
Yeah, they've got the power to do so.
Yeah.
has turned out to be much more disorganized and incompetent than we imagined before their invasion of Ukraine in early 2022. Still, they're definitely a force to be reckoned with nearly 1 million troops, thousands of vehicles, and specialized hacker units. As for other potential attackers, North Korea, for example, may boast that their nuclear weapons can reach the US mainland, but owing to their low budget and antique equipment, there's no way they could invade the entire US.
They look like large
Iran
bullets,
is a
man.
similar story, except that they don't yet have a nuclear warhead, although they're not far off. Realistically speaking, both countries use nukes to preserve the regime rather than actually use them against their enemies. Cuba and Venezuela are two other enemy nations in the US's backyard, but their troop numbers and military budgets are hardly enough to invade the United States. And if all else fails to stop an invasion, we shouldn't forget that America is a nuclear-armed nation itself. It has a triad of air, land, and sea missiles, which make it impossible impossible to take out entirely. Land missiles are stored in the center of the country, and the sea missiles are in submarines, which are constantly on the move, hidden away without a blip on the radar. Since the Cold War though, nuclear weapons have acted more as a deterrent rather than a direct threat. You see, the principle of mutually assured destruction essentially means anyone who uses a nuke will get nuked back, launching a chain reaction of nuclear warfare, eventually obliterating Earth and ending humanity. But just for fun, let's compare nuclear arsenals. Alright, so the US and Russia currently have around 5,000 nukes, with around 1,500 deployed at heavy bomber bases and on intercontinental missiles. And then we of course have China. It has a couple hundred nuclear weapons, but none of them are deployed. Now, these numbers might seem high since they can literally eradicate humanity, but this is actually a low point from the peak of 70,000 nukes worldwide in the mid-1980s.
Wow.
What's still quite worrying though is that while the
70,000 they
US
had.
claims to have decommissioned over 11,000 nuclear warheads since 1994, China and Russia are thought to be increasing their stockpile. But despite this, I hope you can see how costly it would be to even attempt an invasion of the US. Any hypothetical invasion would have to overcome the US's huge military and geographical advantages to gain any ground. While it is plausible that a major state actor like China or Russia could take out satellites and hack critical infrastructure, they'd also have to contend with the millions of well-equipped troops on the ground and a hostile armed population. So realistically, a physical invasion isn't really a possibility, but what if America's enemies could get what they wanted without an invasion? Well, it turns out it's much easier to conquer hearts and minds in an information war.
That's much better. If they want to go ahead and take the US, I think that's much better.
Yeah, true.
Through propaganda, they can
Still
convince the
agree.
public's opinion,
Mm-hmm.
But all in all, I still think US has a better advantage even in that. Like even what is Russia going to do? To like they said they hacked the elections and stuff. I don't think so.
Yeah, like they said, it's been rigged and they elected Trump for that.
But even though even Russia does all the propaganda, no one's going because the US is in a position where they can. China is the only potential threat. China can't even come close to the US. US has so many allies. What does China have?
Yeah, China doesn't really have much.
Exactly.
Than to win with soldiers on the ground. And that might have something to do with Russia's influence campaign in the 2016 US presidential elections. See, after a 3-year investigation, a bipartisan US Senate committee recently concluded that Russia conducted an influence campaign to help Donald Trump get elected. If that's not shocking enough, the report states that Vladimir Putin himself ordered the hacking of Democratic Party emails to be leaked over
That's too
WikiLeaks.
much.
The FBI now has a warrant
I don't
for
know.
12 Russian military intelligence officers it believes interfered in the 2016 elections. So this is a serious incident. A recent report by a group of intelligence agencies claims Russia tried to interfere again in 2020, though on a smaller scale. Whether Russia continues to meddle in US politics in the future or not, the damage may already be done as Americans increasingly report a loss of faith in democracy and government institutions. But that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
What do you think?
Yeah, well, we learned quite a lot in this video.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing that how much defense these guys have. They have almost everything, you know.
They have their resources well attached. They have a good GDP that gives them the ability to spend so much on the military. What was it, 800 billion?
Yeah.
They also, I think, spend extra for the NATO defense budget as well. And then they have they're protected by natural things like the
mountains and all that.
mountains and all. Yeah, the lakes. So
And
I mean,
the ocean,
all in all,
everything, yeah.
they're in a good position, man. Even they got no enemies on their as neighbors. Like China, they think India is an enemy, but if they don't get unified, then like I think US is still the only power left, unless like the rest of the world starts unifying themselves. But that's going to be in a long run because I don't think
It's gonna happen.
it's going to happen anytime soon.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, the video is pretty
pretty
good.
cool, man. The
Yeah.
video is pretty cool. Yeah.
Gotta learn more about the US, and I don't think anyone could just easily mess with the US at all. They're really strong.
No, it's not just a mess. I don't think it's possible at all.
Yeah.
Unless it's a supernatural event, or unless somebody figure out the submarine, like make so many submarines so that they can just bomb the US. But even if they bomb the US, in that case, the NATO will get involved, right? What was it? Some Article 5 or something is going to trigger. So the NATO will get involved because you came into their territory. So that's another problem.
Yeah.
US is unstoppable, man.
Yeah, they're unstoppable, and it's really difficult actually. Even
Yeah.
penetrate to the defense.
They even have the aircraft carriers, right? Hovering around close by.
Yeah, they got everything. They
Everything.
got satellites,
Yeah.
aircraft carriers, the
So-
oceans, the neighbors, almost everything. And the land is really blessed. So yeah.
So that's our take on the video. Hope you guys enjoyed our reaction.
Don't forget
please-
to subscribe
yep.
and leave a like as well.